After decades of living in a comfortable welfare bubble and topping the world's happiness index, well, Dane's sense of safety has been shaken by geopolitical strife and economic uncertainty, a theme likely to impact how they vote tomorrow, November 1. The prospect of energy shortages, rampant inflation and the war in Ukraine has fueled an unprecedented sense of insecurity among Danes. More of them worry about household expenses now than during the worst years of the 2008 financial crisis, and the number of Danes anxious about Russian aggression nearly doubled after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, according to a May survey conducted by Tragfonden. But given broad consensus among the parties on several important issues, a professor of political science at Copenhagen University, Kasper Hansen, has said that it was difficult to pinpoint just one topic that had made it to the top of the election agenda. Meanwhile, the screenwriter of hit series Borgen says the main theme in the show's latest season, the darker side of holding power, drew inspiration from Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, who has been criticized for centralizing authority. The theme has become relevant in the upcoming elections, in which Danes will pass judgment on his leadership during 3 chaotic years, plagued by a pandemic, war, and economic turmoil.
We have a premise for Borgen that we have used for all seasons. Can you remain in power and still remain true to yourself? And this question is put even more on the line in this new season, because she doesn't have anything else but this seat of power, being a minister. And if you only have that in your life, it becomes too precious. It becomes impossible for you to let go. Because you don't have your kids, you don't have friends, you don't have a life where you can say, well, at least I have my family, at least I have my friends, at least I have my hobbies. You don't have anything. Because Birgitte Nyborg is an old character. She is basically a vehicle that we use to portray how human beings basically act under the force of power and pressure. But of course we are inspired. We are inspired by many elements of power that we see both in national and international politics. And naturally we are also inspired by elements in the character of our current Prime Minister, but also elements of the character of former Prime Ministers. So I think we pick and choose from various seats of power, both national and international, and we mix it together, and that becomes Birgitte Nyborg, but naturally also inspired by elements of our current Prime Minister.
Elsewhere, world leaders sent their congratulations via Twitter to Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on his victory in Brazil's election. From the US President Joe Biden, who said, "I send my congratulations to Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on his election to be the next president of Brazil following free, fair and credible elections." New British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said, "I look forward to working together on the issues that matter to the UK and Brazil, from growing the global economy to protecting the planet's natural resources and promoting democratic values." US actors Billy Baldwin and Leonardo DiCaprio also commented on the election results. DiCaprio, who is an environmental activist, also outspoken about the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, said that the outcome of the Brazilian election presents an opportunity to change the course of history, not just for Brazil and the Amazon, but for the world. Leftist Lula da Silva defeated President Jair Bolsonaro in an election runoff that marked a stunning comeback for Lula and the end of Brazil's most right-wing government in decades. Lula won 50.9% of votes, compared with 49.1% for Bolsonaro, the Supreme Electoral Court said, declaring Lula, previously a 2-term president, the winner. More reactions coming in, this time China's foreign ministry congratulating Luis Inácio Lula da Silva for his electoral victory. Relations between China and Brazil, two of the world's largest developing countries, worsened under right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro, which has not conceded the election yet, we're told. Leftist Lula, previously a two-term president, led Brazil into the first BRICS grouping in 2009, initially made up of Brazil, Russia, India and China, before South Africa joined in 2010. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that China is willing to work with Mr. Lula Inácio da Silva to promote the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and Brazil to a new level. VOA's correspondent Jan Bochat joins me now from Sao Paulo with more on the latest. Thanks, Jan. What's the mood after today's announcement?
Well, people were really worried what would happen if Bolsonaro didn't accept the victory of Lula. He didn't recognize that Lula was the winner. He's in the presidential palace, but he didn't talk to anyone, even with his closer allies. A lot of ministers of his government are there now trying to convince him to accept the defeat. So far, some truck drivers blocked some highways in Brazil, saying they won't accept this defeat. They are core supporters of Bolsonaro. But other than that, the country, it's really calm. Everything is working fine. The institutions are working fine. So I think for half of Brazil, it's a feeling of relief. A lot of people here were really, really worried that we were going into an autocracy if Bolsonaro won this election. So other half of Brazil, it's very sad. Brazil is very divided. Almost 50% of the population, of the voters, chose Bolsonaro, and Lula will have 4 years ahead, very, very hard. It will be a very hard time for him to govern this country. Most of the parliament, it's very right-wing politicians, a lot of them very linked to Bolsonaro, so we're going to have some tough days ahead.
Indeed, and also about the margin, quite close one there. Is perhaps Lula da Silva, is this still a popular choice, seeing as he was in prison for a bit on the occasion of bribery?
Well, he's still very popular. He won the election, but this margin, the tight margin like this, we've never seen in the last 35 years in presidential elections. Brazil was never as divided as now. Well, the bribery accusations, Lula went to jail, stayed in prison for more than 1 year, almost 2 years. But the last 4 years were really, really hard here in Brazil. Economy situation is really bad. The poverty came back. Lots of people don't have anything to eat. A lot of people living on the streets. I think this economic situation played a big, big role. People still remember when Lula was president, he was very successful in fighting the poverty. Brazil was in a very good time. It's true, he had a lot of help from the commodities boom from the first decade of the century. But still, Lula was a politician, a president that was paying attention to the poor people in Brazil. That is true, and that's what he said yesterday during his victory speech. He said, I'm going to put all my efforts and try to eradicate the hunger in Brazil. People say almost 30 million people here in Brazil don't know if they are going to have food to eat in the next day. So I think Lula will try to tackle these issues the same way he did in his first 2 terms.
Indeed, wondering about the notable policies and promises that he made in his manifesto. One of them also is, the COVID-19 pandemic, which he had accused the, former President Bolsonaro of not handling quite well, which led to a lot of deaths, Brazilians. But then talk to us about this, the situation right now. If President Bolsonaro does not concede this election, what could occur in Brazil?
I think everything will be as smooth as possible. Bolsonaro is very isolated right now. The Congress, the Senate, everyone it's recognizing the victory of Lula. A lot of allies, very close allies of Bolsonaro, are recognizing the victory. He was expecting to have more support from the army, but the army didn't say anything. They didn't recognize the victory. They don't have to. But they didn't say anything in the contrary. So I think we might see something similar what happened to Trump in U.S., where he was almost alone, saying he wouldn't accept the defeat, but at the end he left the government. I think we're going to have the same here. The country, it's tired. You know, the last 4 years were really tough, as you said. The COVID-19 here was very, very hard. Almost 700,000 people died here. And as I said, the economic situation is really, really bad. There's a lot of political instability in the country, crisis after crisis. So I would say we're going to have a transition, not maybe as easy as the other ones, but I don't think, and most of the people, they don't believe anything different than that, than Lula inauguration on the first day of 2023 will happen. So the country is calm now. That's the main thing, and we don't think anything bad or anything like a coup d'etat that Bolsonaro could try will happen.
We want to share in that optimism. VOA's correspondent Tian Bochat, thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's also another election to hold tomorrow, November 1st, 2022. Israel holds an unprecedented fifth election in less than 4 years, with former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vying for a comeback. Caught in an election cycle since 2019, the same year in which Mr. Netanyahu was indicted for corruption on charges he denies, voters hope to break the deadlock between the most dominant politician of his generation and his many rivals. So, who's in the race? We have Yair Lapid, the centrist prime minister, 58 years old, who is a former television host, finance and foreign minister. He soared into politics on the wings of a social economic protest movement about a decade ago. There is a future. Yesh Atid party, second in the polls, has shown some upward momentum, but his camp of allied parties, spanning right to left, is smaller than Mr. Netanyahu's bloc. Next is, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, a long and familiar face of Israel, head of the opposition. He served as prime minister for more than a decade. It's been a rocky few years for him. His stewardship of Israel's COVID-19 vaccine rollout was not enough to halt his political decline. A sense that he was living on borrowed time after 12 consecutive years in office was compounded by criminal charges over alleged favors to media tycoons and also illegal receipt of expensive cigars and champagne. Well, Mr. Netanyahu has denied all wrongdoing and says without offering any evidence that he has been a victim of deep state conspiracy against him. Defense Minister Benny Gantz also in the run. He heads the center-right Zionist Union, predicted to win far fewer seats than Netanyahu and Lapid's parties. But that has not stopped the former military chief, who is 63, from proclaiming himself the only candidate who can break the Netanyahu deadlock by forming new alliances and heading a broad government that would extract Israel from 4 years of unprecedented constitutional crisis. But who else matters? Itamar Ben-Gvir, an ultranationalist lawmaker who may be Mr. Netanyahu's kingmaker and test Israel's foreign relations if made minister, convicted in 2007 of racist incitement and support for a group on both the Israeli and U.S. terror blacklist, is 46 and says that he has since then matured. A joint faction which includes his far-right party, Jewish Power, is predicted to come in third, and his growing popularity has caused some alarm at home and also abroad. Let's go over to other stories now, this time the tragedy over the weekend in South Korea. The Prime Minister, Hang Dok-soo, has promised a thorough investigation into the Halloween crush that killed more than 150 people in the capital and plunged the country into mourning. Officials said today that the death toll had risen to 154, with 149 people injured, 33 of them in serious condition. Tens of thousands of people had crowded into the narrow streets and alleyways of Seoul's popular Itaewon district on Saturday for the first major Halloween festivities since the COVID pandemic struck 3 years ago. Many of the revelers were in their teens and dressed in Halloween costumes, but chaos erupted when people poured into one particularly narrow and sloping alley, even after it was already packed. President Yoon Suk-yeol, who has declared a period of national mourning and designated Itaewon a disaster zone, he visited a memorial altar outside the city with his wife to pay his respects to those who died. Former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon was also among those expressing their condolences. Of course, China has offered condolences to the victims killed in South Korea's deadly Halloween crush. Chinese President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Keqiang were among the foreign leaders expressing condolences to the government. According to Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, South Korean Foreign Ministry said that 26 foreign nationals from 14 countries were killed, and among the 154, at least 4 of them were Chinese nationals, the Xinhua news agency reported, citing the Chinese embassy in Seoul. Mr. Zhao said that China is coordinating with the South Korean government to provide further assistance to Chinese families. To another tragedy over the weekend, this time in India. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi has expressed his condolences today after the death of at least 134 victims, including many children who were killed in a bridge collapse, one of India's deadliest accidents in the past 10 years. Mr. Modi was attending an honorary ceremony in Kadavia. Some 400 people had bought tickets to get onto the bridge to celebrate the Diwali and Titat Puja festivals less than a week after the span was reopened following renovations. Police registered a criminal case against unnamed persons responsible for the renovation, maintenance and management of the bridge. The government has formed a 5-member team to investigate the disaster.
We are having coordinated action by our NDRF teams. The local SDRF is there, fire services officials, army columns, and some global commandos also there. So the effort is on to trace the missing persons.
Into UK politics now, where Britain's Home Secretary Suella Braverman has declined to respond to a journalist's question after she left her London home today, as pressure mounts over her handling of migrant processing centres in the country. The Home Secretary came under fire at the weekend after claims she ignored legal warnings by keeping asylum seekers in processing centres for too long. Ms. Braverman did not comment when a reporter asked if she is the right person to get this crisis under control. A man threw petrol bombs attached to fireworks at a processing centre in the southern English port of Dover on Sunday and then killed himself. The motive for the attack was not known. The incident comes at a time when British policy towards migrants and asylum seekers is a heated political issue. The Dover facility is the first stop for thousands of people who make the dangerous journey across the English Channel before they ascend to other accommodation while their claims to stay in Britain are reviewed. And the predominantly Muslim kingdom of Bahrain is gearing up for Pope Francis' historic visit set to take place between November 3rd and the 6th. The Pope will be attending the Bahrain Forum for Dialogue, East and West for Human Coexistence, and is expected to hold Mass. In 2019, Pope Francis visited Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, the first pontiff to visit the Arabian Peninsula and say a Mass there. Bahrain is about 70% Muslim and, unlike Saudi Arabia, allows a small Christian community, made mostly up of foreign workers, to practice their faith publicly in the 2 churches there. And to the United States, which could be facing tough times if rail workers go on strike, as most U.S. goods are transported by railway. Americans thought the U.S. had averted a rail shutdown when a tentative agreement that was reached by rail workers and railway companies over a month ago. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird has more.
The United States is on the verge of a railroad shutdown due to a second railroad union voting down the labor deal needed to avoid a nationwide strike.
And the railroad employers have agreed to a cooling off period that extends well into November, giving them adequate time to continue their work and ensuring that our economy is under no immediate threat. The president remains focused on protecting America's families, farms, and businesses by avoiding a rail shutdown. That is our priority. Of course, when it comes to these discussions, both sides have said they share that desire, as well as the president has said for months, any shutdown would be completely unacceptable.
An array of shipper groups have asked the Biden administration to head off a potential railroad strike, as Biden was instrumental in working to secure the original deal.
As you might guess, I am very pleased to announce a tentative labor agreement that has been reached between the railroad workers and the railway companies. This agreement is a big win for America and for both, in my view. And this is a win for tens of thousands of rail workers and for their dignity and the dignity of their work. It's a recognition of that.
A trade association representing farmers, manufacturers, food and beverage producers wrote a letter to President Biden insisting that the railroad union contract must be ratified now, as a rail shutdown would further inflationary pressures. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channels Television News.
And to health. In Africa's current monkeypox outbreak, sickness and death sometimes go undetected. Experts say the low count of cases obscures a bigger episode and death toll than official statistics suggest. A trip to some settlements in central Congo reveals several monkeypox patients, including 2 who had died whose cases were not recorded previously.
At a village clinic separated from the world by a tangle of meandering waterways and forests in central Congo, 6-year-old Angelica Lifafu screams as nurses in protective suits pick at one of the hundreds of boils that trouble her delicate skin. Her uncle, 12-year-old Lisungu Lifafu, sits at the door of her bed, facing away from the sunlight that pours through the doorway, and pains in his swollen, weeping eyes. When nurses approach, he raises his chin, but cannot look up.
He started getting sick around 6 or 7 September. Then, we went to the local healthcare center and tried everything, but it was in vain. That's why we've now come here, as we were told that there are doctors here at Yalulia who knows how to treat this disease. I said, let's put the 2 sick children in a canoe and cross the river to go to the hospital. That's how we got here.
The children have monkeypox, a disease first detected in Congo 50 years ago, but cases have spiked in West and Central Africa since 2019. The illness received little attention until this year, infecting 75,000 people. Global health bodies have counted far fewer cases in Africa, where it is endemic, than in Europe and the United States. Figures from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention show in the West only about 10 people have died of monkeypox this year. But according to the Africa CDC, in poorer African countries where many people do not have quick access to health facilities or are not aware of the dangers, over 130 have died, almost all in Congo. Workers say a shortage of testing facilities and poor transport links makes tracing the virus nearly impossible. Without treatment, Angelica and Lisungu can only wait for the illness to run its course. Ahead of them lies a myriad of possible outcomes, including recovery, blindness, or, as was the case with a family member in August, death. The nurses caring for them seethe at the lack of treatments and care. Often, patients cannot afford medicines for even simple ailments, they say.
What we're doing here is we have taken things into our own hands. With the little means that we have here at the center, we buy medicine to take care of our patients, because otherwise, when they come here, they have to pay whatever rate the center charges. And then there are families who choose to stay at home or stay away because they don't have the money to come to the healthcare center.
None of the cases was reported to authorities until local health official Theopist Maloko visited. Without test results, they are now logged as suspected cases. When nurses took samples from sores on Angelica's leg and placed them in a polystyrene cool box strapped to the back of a motorbike, Maloko was skeptical because to avoid spoiling, samples need to be kept cooled and reach a laboratory within 48 hours. But they often do not, he says. The nearest testing lab is in Kinshasa. Results take weeks or months. Experts think NGOs need to think about taking charge of the disease by helping equip the health center zones and centers with the specific medicines needed to treat it, and to cut it short by ensuring that people get vaccinated.
We're back in the UK, where Just Stop Oil supporters sprayed orange paint onto 4 central London buildings today, marking the 31st day of climate change protests. At 8:30 a.m. local time, the group covered the Bank of England News Corps headquarters, the Home Office and the MI5 building in orange paint sprayed from fire extinguishers as they represent the pillars that support and maintain the power of the fossil fuel economy, the government, security, finance and media. That's according to its press release. The protest is the latest by the group's activists who previously threw soup over Vincent van Gogh's painting Sunflower at London's National Gallery on October 14. Well, in another area in London, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak purchased Remembrance Day poppies outside Downing Street before putting it on himself, his wife, Akshata Murthy, and the family dog, Nova. Remembrance Day poppies are worn in Britain to honour soldiers who died in war, a tradition that starts close to the time of Remembrance Day, which is on the 11th of November. The Sunak family is the richest ever occupants of number 10 Downing Street. The vast majority of his family's wealth comes from his wife, an Indian citizen with a stake of 0.93% in Infosystems, valued at about $721 million. The couple's wealth has been a divisive issue for the British public. That's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Bye for now.